All right, cool. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Appreciate everybody for attending our part 4 webinar on sustainability. It's been some really good discussions and definitely excited to have Matt on. Just a quick background on Winston Engineering. We've been in business since 2015. We just celebrated 6 years in business. And we've been providing HVAC, electrical, plumbing, alternative energy such as solar, battery backup, and also now fire alarm design for the cannabis industry, also non-cannabis, but we've done well over 20 some odd facilities across the country. And just recently we wrapped up an extraction project in Louisiana. And today we have Matt Stasium. Am I pronouncing your name correct? Stasium?
You got it. Yep,
All
Stasium.
right, perfect.
You got it.
And I had a conversation with him. We met on LinkedIn, and I figured, hey, this is some information that I need to share in terms of, one, due to sustainability, but also giving people options in terms of their, where they get their power from, because I had no idea that you didn't have to go with the local utility. You can, save yourself quite a bit of money. And so I wanted to bring on Matt Stasium, Director of Strategic Relationships with Atlas Retail. So I will hand it over to Matt. You can go ahead and start the show.
Great. Let me do a quick screen share here. Let me know once that comes up. Let's see if I've got it here. Should be there. Let me know if that comes up.
There you go. You got it.
All right, great. Well, first off, thanks everybody for your attendance today. I know taking time out of your day on a busy Friday. We really appreciate it. Anthony, thank you for hosting this as well as the other webinars over the past few weeks. I found that they've been extremely informative, innovative, and really covered a broad range of cannabis industry and the things that folks should be looking at for their facilities. We're going to run through hopefully about 30 minutes or so of information, leave some time for Q&A. Please feel free as we go along, go ahead and post any questions in the chat. I know Anthony and I will try to keep an eye on those. And then towards the end, we'll try to answer some Q&A for anyone that might have some questions. If we do get a chance to connect in the future, whether it's following this live webinar or after Anthony gets a chance to post this on both LinkedIn, I believe he's going to be doing it, and then also on his website, please let us know that this is how you found us or got in contact with us. We want to make sure that we kind of understand how we got connected. So let me get into this pretty quick here. So just a quick overview on the agenda. So give you a little background on who Atlas is and who we are and kind of what we do. Energy and cultivation, that's actually got quite a bit in terms of why this is important. Knowing your markets, establishing corporate goals, know your risks and tolerances. I think that's pretty important. And this can go well beyond just cultivation. This can go into really any sector or any industry. Know your energy, peak energy avoidance, and the products that go along with the different markets. Renewables and sustainability has become a very big topic recently, and I think most folks have that on their radar in some form or fashion. And then a big component to this, and I think why everyone's really involved in their business is to control costs. All right, so we'll go ahead and jump in. So just a brief background on who Atlas is and a little bit about what we do. We are a minority-owned organization built from a team of energy industry professionals with a diverse skill set and backgrounds. We create and implement energy management solutions, basically helping clients to figure out what is the best energy strategy for their business. We provide unmatched price transparency and reporting by leveraging our wholesale presence, and I'll talk about that in the next slide, a little bit about that. And then we offer a unique value to the bottom line while mitigating the customer's risk, right? So I think a lot of this really is about understanding your business and how that energy factor plays into that. And so just going along the lines of the process that we use, really, how do you currently buy energy? What do you look at for the portfolio? What's the market currently doing, and what are the suppliers within those markets? And again, we'll get into that in a few minutes about how that works. What do the numbers say, right? This is a numbers game in terms of what's the information in the market, what's happening at your facility, and how does that play in together. The next thing we'll do is we actually tie into an executive recommendation. We will talk through all the different factors, both in the retail and wholesale markets, and then how that ties into your risk strategy and the plan that we've communicated and talked to you with. And then executing upon that plan and strategy. And then also for the future, how does that perform? You know, monitoring, did it perform the way you wanted to? And does that strategy continue to work as your business evolves? One of the key differences and that I want to talk a bit about why we're a little different than other folks in the marketplace. Our sister company, Atlas Commodities, is a wholesale. Sorry, let me go back one. Sorry, is a wholesale counterpart for us. And so what they do is they're active in all of the wholesale energy markets out there. And we leverage the proprietary wholesale market information to drive quantitative results for our clients. So it increases the transparency, better market timing, and better data for information to get to that ultimate goal of better energy contracts. So real quick, in terms of actually not real quick, this is actually a big portion of what we want to talk about here. Why energy and cultivation matter so much. So on a macro level, and the source for this for government, environmental, and consumers leaders and advocating federal energy efficiency policies. And what they're saying is that indoor cannabis cultivation is one of the most energy intensive industries, over $6 billion in energy annually currently. So that's more than the entire federal government in terms of energy facility for procurement. So think about that. Just a massive footprint right now. And the reason being 24/7 operations, energy intensive process, and hyper expansion happening in the marketplace right now. So it's something to be focused on. One of the things I want to point out in the graph on the right is that look at the amount of growth projected over the next 10 years in the cultivation space. So of the three factors, and everyone's hearing about them now, you've got your electric vehicles, you've got data centers, and you've got cannabis cultivation that are truly driving a massive portion of the marketplace over the next 10 years. So it's extremely important to understand that, both from your own perspective and the cost analysis to it, but also the overall perspective to the energy system and the grid. So now how does this affect you at the site level? So according to NCIA, and I think a lot of folks have heard of that if you're in the cannabis industry, the National Cannabis Industry Association, the environmental sustainability in the cannabis industry impacts best management practices and policy considerations report came out with a lot of really good information. And this was just this past October, so it's very current. And one of the main things that they came out and said in that is that energy costs represent 30 to 60% of total operation expenses. So just a massive portion of a cultivation centers and production facilities overall budget. So what goes into that? So why is it such a large operational cost? So it's really two factors: the usage that the facility is producing, right? How much are you consuming? And then the cost per kWh. You know, how much does each kilowatt hour cost generates the total budget for that operating expense. So something to be managed, and it's could be over half of your overall operating budget. So if you're looking in terms of structure and where to go, these are some things that you really want to manage. So let me take a second and really ask about like what's driving that operational expense. And this is where Anthony, and I'm sure a lot of his focus goes into in his days, but you're talking about energy intensive lighting, dehumidification systems, space heating, space cooling, preheating of irrigation and water, generation of CO2, ventilation and air conditioning, and then the HVAC system. So you've got a very high level of energy intensity that should be managed and monitored throughout the process. So a couple things I want to go through that are still from this same sustainability report, that electricity generation and power supply for indoor cannabis requires large amounts of energy to operate lighting, internal controls, like we just talked about. Electricity demand required for indoor cannabis has that to be equated of data centers. So we know the growth of data centers, we know the energy intensity of it. But again, because you're looking at facilities that are running 24/7 operations, 365, then these are something that should be considered and understanding, you know, how that goes to your overall cost. The other piece that we're going to, you know, get into here in a little bit that was also noted in this is that the environmental impact. right? So what are some of the environmental impacts? And it's, again, becoming such a large and broad topic that organizations need to have it on their radar. So electricity generation, again, from that same report, does not necessarily equate to adverse impacts to the environment. So renewable forms of production, solar, wind, things along those lines need to be evaluated in the process. And again, we'll get into a little bit down the road about how each of the markets can impact that, and also understanding where you are in the process for those different forms. Same thing can be said for on-site or off-site renewables, and we'll get into that as well. And I'm sure most folks have seen lots of solar out there. So you want to see and how that plays into the overall perspective. So know your markets. So is it deregulated? And I think Anthony had mentioned it when he first, when him and I first talked, and then he mentioned it on the start of this call, is that, is your market deregulated? And well, what does that mean? So I'll go back and I apologize for anyone that's on the call here that knows what deregulation is or lives in a market where it is deregulated, but I want to take a second and make sure I level set for everyone on the call. So a little bit of Energy 101. So for those that might not know, across the US, there are markets where you can actually choose your power supply. You do not have to go to the local utility to buy your power supply. Now, a lot of them are still regulated, but in the markets that are deregulated, you get third-party suppliers where they actually create a competitive marketplace. You can go out there and you can shop your power supply just like you can your phone provider, your service providers, or different things like that. And it allows for a competitive marketplace and allows the consumer to control the commodity that they're putting in place. So what that does, it allows for more flexibility in products, which again we'll get into in a little bit, because a lot of the consumers have dynamic needs. Not every consumer is the same, and so you want to be able to go out there and drive to that. The other reason for deregulation across the United States is not only for the competition, but it's also to spur on renewable development and allow for the free market access of that, rather than just being controlled by a central monopoly like a local utility. Some of the other things that you consider in these deregulated markets is cost fluctuations, balancing of risk, and like I mentioned, fluctuations for both your business environment, but also usage changes in that. So again, we'll get into that a little bit more. But the map to the right, you can kind of see some of the deregulated markets and the markets that Atlas works in. So go down the list here. So things to consider in each of these markets. What are the current utility rates? And this is both for regulated and deregulated markets. Needing to understand where the current supply would be, when and how, or if you're currently in operation, that price per kWh that will be going into your overall budget for energy. Very, very important to understand this. Like I mentioned in the deregulated markets, this is something that you can shop and should be shopping to go out there and find the price that both fits you, but also the product that goes along with it. But also looking in the regulated markets, there may be an option where you're on a different tariff rate or a different rate set by the utility that maybe needs to be reviewed based on the size, the type of production you have. Does it fall under manufacturing? And are there maybe certain tax benefits around it? So there's each of these markets has different criteria that need to be understood, and know your markets as you're going into those. Other key factors in these markets are switching rules. If you're in California, you probably know about deregulation, because I know it's been around and talked about quite often, but there are switching rules that go into play with that, and the times of year that you can enroll into these programs. And also throughout the country, there's also different rules about the minimum stays in these programs and how you can switch in and out of them. In certain states, like let's take Texas, for example, it's a fully deregulated market. So even down to the residential level, you're choosing your supplier and picking your market. In different states, there's size requirements that you need to know whether or not your organization meets those requirements to be part of the deregulated market or the competitive energy space. The next thing to consider is what's called renewable portfolio standards, or RPS, as you might hear throughout the market. And what that is each state has a specific portfolio that they require generators, the power companies that are producing the power, to have a specific blend of renewables within their energy stack, right? So you may be in an area where it's nuclear and coal and natural gas, for a lot of the Northeast. And so within those markets, they also have requirements around renewables. And so though you want to understand what the renewable portfolio standards are in those markets, because it also might go into your corporate message and your corporate initiatives about what your fuel mix is. And also might be something to consider if you're going to be siting a new location across the country and you say, hey, we have expansion plans. What does it look like within the different markets? And that, again, that can go for any type of organization or company out there as you're looking into expansion. The next thing to consider and talk about here, and we'll definitely get into this a little bit more because it's probably, especially if you haven't been around the energy markets, a term that you may not have heard of before, but forward capacity markets. And what that is it's really a reserve. And like I said, we'll get into it a little more, but a reserve to make sure for grid reliability. And each of these has different components to it across the markets, and understanding what that looks like going into these markets for future contracts. Because as power contracts come up, you're actually buying a contract for the future based on historical. So you're going to take a look and say, okay, this is going to be my rate for the next X amount of years or months. And that's based on what's happened previously, both in your own consumption and also in the markets and the power market. So we'll get into that a little bit. Generation mix. So what that means is what is the mix of generators within each of these markets that creates the power supply? So it all goes into one big pool throughout each of these different regions. But what are the different sources within those? So like I mentioned, you've got your natural gas, you've got nuclear throughout some areas. You've got coal, unfortunately, in still some areas. You've got hydroelectric, wind power, solar's coming online at utility scale. So really understanding the generation mix throughout the country should be something that taken into consideration. The big piece to that when it comes to cost, understanding the generation mix within your region can have a massive impact on where costs are going. Because let's say you're in a region that it's very intense on natural gas. If there's fluctuations in the gas prices, how does that impact it? If you're in a high coal environment, if there's regulation around coal retirement, how does that impact future pricing? So understanding the generation mix is very important in knowing your markets. Supply and demand fundamentals. So this is, and I think as we're all coming out of the COVID world, it's going to become more and more prevalent. What is the supply and demand across each of these markets? What's driving that? In certain regions, you're seeing more and more generation facilities going into retirement, whether they're outdated, whether it's a fossil fuel that no longer can meet environmental standards. And then also in that environment, how much industrial growth or consumer growth to meet the demand side of it. So you have to understand the supply and demand fundamentals that go into this, so that you can understand how that impacts forward pricing and whether or not it can make a difference on your overall cost, or should be monitored to make sure it's not going to be a risk to you in the future. And then the next piece to do it is within each of these markets is regulatory risk. So oversight, and this goes to both regulated and deregulated markets. We know that there's always regulation that goes into these, and the energy markets are no different. And so with that, understanding how that's performed previously, and have there been regulatory changes, and then how that also will impact for the future. And do those regulatory changes, through those things that are coming into the future, does that have an impact to change your current rate, right? So that you need to monitor this, because in specific regions, it actually has a change in law where that can change your contracted and budgeted rate. So to be aware of those regulatory risks and the environment that each of these states and markets holds is very important, so that you know and you have a plan for it for the future. Excuse me. So the next piece is establishing corporate goals. So this isn't just, this isn't energy. This is going to be really across the board, whether you're talking about production or build out or phase strategy. But in terms of energy, establish corporate goals. Here we're showing that we're going to have a corporate goal to reduce our energy spend or our energy consumption, let's say, by 15% next year, or maybe over a period of time. Because energy, especially during the cultivation process, as we've talked about, is anywhere from 30 to 60% of that overall budget, you're going to want to have a goal for it, right? You're going to want to know what that means. And maybe it's not in terms of reducing spend, because you might be an organization that says, well, gosh, we're actually going to be adding facility. We're going to be adding space. We have a phase growth, and we're in phase 1, but we're going to be in phase 3 by the time 2025 rolls around. So with that, understand the corporate goals And then this way it can help align to what that utility strategy should be, and then how that plays into your overall budget for the future. So with that strategy, part of that is knowing your risks, knowing your tolerance around it, and how that then ultimately plays into the decision-making process. So some of the risks to monitor out there, and one of them we had just mentioned is market risk. What are the different factors that are going into the specific markets that you live in and work in and producing in? What could be coming down the road so that that you're protecting against those or planning for them? The next piece is your energy or usage risk. So what that is how much and how do you plan on using energy into the future? And with energy, it's a little bit different. It's not always about how much you use, but it's also when that's being used. And that drives to really the price of it. And as you can see on the chart on the bottom, there's actually different times throughout the year of energy trading curves, and I'll get into that a little bit more as well, that prices fluctuate. It's a real-time traded commodity to where you're seeing these things on a regular basis move up and down, and a lot of that's factored in between the demand that we talked about with the supply, geoeconomical or kind of geopolitical events that could happen that could drive energy and risk pricing. So you want to understand your usages to match along with that. And again, I'll get into that a little bit more on another slide. The next piece is component pass-through risk. And the two I really want to talk about, and I'll kind of steer over to the graph on the right, the top right, is capacity and transmission. So you see in the cost breakdown, there's several components within a total electricity price. And with that, you've got a big chunk of that, which is supply, which is the actual commodity that you can go out there and procure and find a different third-party supplier so that you have a competitive market for that portion of it. The other components, losses, ancillaries, distribution, those are all pieces within it. And then the one that I want to point out a little bit is capacity and transmission. As you can see on this chart, it is a large portion of your overall energy component. And with that, it's a component that can actually be managed at the customer level. So like I mentioned, what capacity is, it's the reserve to make sure that the grid stability and reliability is there from the grid operators. And with that, every customer is assigned a capacity tag, and along with that goes a rate, or at least they have basically a snapshot of how you've used power previously. And what they then do is forecast that for the future to create these tags or these rates, because what that will do is ensures that on any given peak day, and we'll get into peak management here in a little bit, but any given peak day, the grid will have enough capacity and enough transmission to ensure that all consumers have that power. So it's really saying, well, we might only ever use 80%, and then every once in a while we'll jump to 100%. The grid wants to make sure that it has that reliability. So again, understanding the components and the risks of those components within each market. And then why I talk about the component risk pass-through, because it also goes to your tolerances around budget variances, right? So if you're passing something through and allowing it to have flexibility, you want to make sure that your budget and your finance organization understands that piece of it as well. Make sure we're doing okay on time here. All right. So know your energy, and I throw up there, energy is complicated, right? But it doesn't have to be. It's something that you can navigate through. And something that you want to take a look at. So on the top right, there's different independent service operators, or as some folks might know them, ISOs or ISOs. And so each of these has different requirements, different regulations, risks that need to be accounted for. Each drives to a different wholesale market for that commodity piece that we talked about. And even within each of these markets, or in these independent service operators, even within the states for each of those, you might see different criteria, and understanding those can really create bottom line impact and overall, because energy plays such an overall role in your production. The graph on the left shows a wholesale power strip. This one happens to be ISO New England, so up in the Northeast. And there's several factors, like I mentioned, that go into these prices on a minute by minute basis, and understanding those on kind of where it's been, where it's averaging, where it's been last trading, the means, and also the bottoms of these is very important, because like I mentioned, supply and demand, geopolitical, and a big factor in energy pricing and the wholesale market is also weather. historical weather patterns, by kind of month over month, but then also future predictions and how and when those future predictions are played in or are priced into that wholesale environment. So really understanding that and how it might impact. And then looking down at the graph on the right. So this is, let me go back one, sorry. This is a usage pattern of kind of a typical customer that, which is in the green. And then you have the market price in the yellow, right? So a typical customer, you're not going to use flat power across all months, because what's happening is some months are warmer, some months are colder. You might have to ramp up air conditioning load or HVAC load or heating load. The water might be coming in colder, so you actually have to preheat it more, which becomes more energy intensive in certain months. And so what you're looking at here is different peaks of how much power is being used over a period of time, and then how that matches against where the market price is during those particular months. So that's important to understand, because again, it's also how you use power, not always about how much. Because if let's say you're using power at the very peak of the market, right when everybody else is using it, and that's your highest demand, you're also going to have a higher price during that period of time. So it's important to understand, because then as we get into this a little bit further, I'll talk about the peak demand management importance of it, but then also on the product that's being selected, because you do have choices when you have different, when you understand your level of when and how you're using power, you can choose different types of products that better fit the needs, and you don't have to just have a fixed product for over a period of time. So like I mentioned, peak energy avoidance and demand management. So what peak demand management is going back to that capacity portion of it, where it's really, because it's such a large component, to manage that, it actually encourages customers and really through price signals to use power during non-peak hours, right? So you're talking about night times and weekends. If anyone's old enough, like I am on the call, you remember that the telecom or the cellular companies used to do nights and weekends for free, right? Because it was a lower demand type time of day. And so think of that similarly with the capacity markets and the energy markets. So allowing you to have flexibility in that could drive to a different ultimate cost and controlling that cost for your production. So if you have a type of facility where you can damper down lights, ratchet back HVAC, if there's times that maybe production or cultivation taking place and that could be shifted to off hours, distribution, again, if that could be shifted to off hours, all those things can go into being a factor for that overall energy component and what that means to the budget. And I want to keep coming back to that, because all these pieces add up to what it looks like for understanding and making sure you have a controlled budget for the future. Actively curtailing at the site. So basically, and in some of these markets, there's actually demand management or DR, demand response programs that actually do initiated calls to customers that are part of these programs, and they'll actually pay customers to reduce power during peak times. And the reason that happens is because it's actually cheaper for a utility or a grid to pay customers to do this and shed load kind of across the playing field than it is to build a new generation facility. So they say we can actually, in peak demand times, get customers to drop load. We don't have to go out there and build a new coal-fired plant or try to expand capacity at a hydro facility or anything like that. So it actually it incentivizes customers to manage their power at certain times. So with all that information, it really comes down to understanding, we talked about understanding your own usages, understanding the markets that go with it, because what you're trying to get to is finding a product that fits your organization, taking those risk criteria into factor, taking all the other components that are driving to that rolled up price, and understanding how you want that to serve your production for your budget and your finance team. So there's a few different options, and there's a lot of different variations of this. And I just wanted to highlight a couple. So you've got your fixed price option, which is basically saying, I'm going to know my exact kWh price for every kilowatt hour that I bring in, for no matter how much I use, right? And there are some variants around usage, but that's another topic. But So with that, understanding that the only variance in your rate or your monthly bill will be how much you use, right? So you've controlled the fixed portion of it, the dollar per kWh, and now you only have to worry about how much is consumed on each month. So with that, because the fixed price and all those variables that we're taking into it, there could be premiums within that. And what we do is make sure that all those premiums are down to the very lowest level because of understanding those wholesale markets. You don't want to be paying more for something that you don't have to, and also because there might be some uncertainty around what that is. So understanding that everything that rolls up into that fixed price. LMP, or basically a floating price, where allowing your power to fluctuate on the market. And what this can do is it actually could maybe perform better than a fixed price would, but it will have fluctuations month over month, and you'll have changes in that power price. So you now have two variables in that, but it could perform better than just fixing it because there wouldn't be the premiums that are included to fix that, or the risk from the supply market. And then the other option is to blend those together. Maybe say, well, we actually know that we've got a risk tolerance that allows for some flexibility in our budgets. And so what we want to do is we actually just want to fix a portion of our energy and say, okay, 50% of it we're going to say is fixed. We know that rate coming in, and we're going to let the balance of it float on market. And with products like that, it actually allows you to layer in additional fixed portions throughout time, so that as your risk tolerances change, as your production and or facility or needs of the business change, you can actually control your power contracts with that as well. The other piece to those, and in any of these products, you can actually fix all the components like we talked about on that graph previously, where it's multiple components within that. You fix them all and it's one rate, or you can actually have some of those be passed through. You can choose to pass those through, and again, not having to pay premiums on it. In a situation where you might be doing some demand management, maybe you're going to be retrofitting your place for either new HVAC or upgraded lighting, that's going to drive your usage and consumption down, especially during some peak hours. You're going to want to make sure your product, your energy contract, allows for the net benefit for future reductions in what those costs would be. So if you had fixed that and you make the changes to your facility, you could be that it either you don't see the net benefit or it takes a longer ROI on that investment into the reduction. Because a lot of times, if you're going in there for something that's changing your energy consumption, you're actually going to look at how it's impacting your overall energy budget. So again, understanding how what the company wants to do and how that then ties into your energy planning. And again, organizations like Winston Engineering always kind of take that into factor, I'm sure, when they're putting things together. So, and then also understanding the past performance versus average performance of the alternative. So really understanding which each of the, how each one would have performed historically and what the future markets based on those analytics will perform for the future, right? So really trying to have a good understanding of those product analytics, because there's a lot of choices out there and you want to make sure it aligns correctly for your business. So another reason for product selection, because now let's talk about renewable power with that, right? So in both regulated and deregulated markets, customers can actually choose to offset their power consumption with renewables. So one of the things that a lot of folks, especially in production facilities, have looked at, on-site solar, right? So with that, you can actually have something on your own facility, whether it's land mounted. Let's say you have a large space, either open area, maybe you're covering parking, or on top of your roof and facility there. The other piece you can look at is renewable energy credit. And so what that is through the competitive markets, just like you can buy a power supply, you're going to go out there and obtain these renewable energy credits by purchasing them directly from different renewable suppliers. And those can range anywhere from kind of national level, which is basically a blend of a lot of different things out there. Right now, I believe wind power out of probably West Texas is one of the cheaper options, all the way to very site specific or region specific, saying, I want a solar facility in Western PA because my production is close to that, right? That's my air shed, or that's my environmental impact that I want to be offsetting very closely with. And then the other one to factor in is there's also power purchase agreements or off-site renewable generation, to where you can actually directly connect through financial contracts or power contracts directly to a facility. You might say, you know, our organization has deep environmental goals. We want to make sure that we're connecting with that, and we want to ensure that our supply is tied to these projects across the country. And we have access to several, hundreds really across the country, because it's just such a broad market right now with the different options that are available, that you want to understand those. And then going back to the product of the supply contract, you want to make sure that you have the flexibility to evolve that as your business evolves and your corporate and strategy goals evolve with that as well. One of the things that I do want to mention on renewables. So the industry, the cannabis industry is actually doing a great job to kind of pre-regulate themselves before regulators step in. It really looks from the research that I've done and the folks that I've talked to, is that they're trying to be ahead of it in terms of kind of self-mandating and say, if we're going to be, you know, being the growth that we see in the energy space, we're also going to go out there and have the correct initiative and have the correct mindset around what renewables we're tying into that to either offset it or reduce the consumption. And with that, there is no silver bullet. And what they're trying to do is really have a holistic approach when it comes to energy and renewables and how that ties in. The other piece to that is consumers, right? Your consumer base out there is watching this. And I think we've seen that at a very high corporate level from Fortune 100 companies all the way down to some mom and pop shops. Renewables and your consumers are tied hand in hand anymore, and understanding what your consumer wants and then tying that in to the message and the renewables that you're able to procure through the deregulated markets is very important. And again, goes to part of your corporate and overall strategy. So I think we're doing okay on time. Maybe run a little bit over the 30 minutes I said, but so controlling costs in summary. So I want to get into this a little bit more, and then we'll open up to some questions here. So kind of going through this a little bit more, evaluating the options, understand the competitive energy structure within your market. I know we've talked about that quite a bit. Each of these pieces rolls up to that. Understand that, make sure you're going through each component of it so that it does drive to the strategy that you and your team have sat down and reviewed. The other piece to evaluating options is access to on-bill financing through supply contracts. And I want to take just a minute to pause on that, because there are options throughout the markets and through these deregulated markets with competitive supply or third-party supply that we talked about, where you can actually finance on-bill financing for retro commissioning, let's say lighting projects or HVAC. You can actually, through your energy bill, put that fee so that it's, rather than having to come out with a CapEx or a capital outlay to get something done, it can actually be over your overall energy budget. And with that, depending on what the project is, maybe that offset of the difference in price that's now on your energy bill actually is offset by the reduction in power. So maybe your ROI is something to take a look at on whether or not that on-bill financing would make sense in some of these different markets. But there is that option. There's quite a few different programs out there for it. So it's something to consider if CapEx might be a question for you. Know your energy. Again, this is going to the summary. Understand your consumption, understand where it currently stands and where it will be in the future. It's really important that the future piece of this is understood, and you're working with someone to help project that, because what's going to happen as you're going out to competitive markets and you're trying to get that supply quote, they're only taking a look at what you've done historically. So historically, you might be using, X amount of kWh, but you're in a phase one of your growth cycle. Within the next 3 years, you're going to be at phase 2, phase 3, or maybe even phase 4 of that, and in terms of production and distribution. So you're going to want to go ahead and make sure that the ramp up schedule, and you're working to make sure that that's put into the competitive bid process. Because what's going to happen with that, that'll get you a better price for the future. The more knowledge in terms of that, the better, and it'll also allow you to plan for that budgeting and further growth and expansion. Set the corporate goals and guidelines. I think, again, that's something we've harped on a few times here. Determine the best energy product to fit your needs. Let data drive your decision. There's a lot of information out there. It's a lot of things that take into really let the data and the wholesale markets and the information around each component drive to the decision-making process to make sure that it is what you're looking for. And then also go back and make sure that you've got a view on how it is performing, making sure that what you put in place and what you set as those goals is actually performing to the standards that you look for. And then finally, manage the wholesale market. By understanding those costs, get a lot of the premiums out that suppliers have to put in there because of risk. Understand them, work with a partner that understands them, make sure that going into these, this procurement and supply process, that you have a good handle on what's going to be going into to your future strategy around energy, because there's a lot of components that you can and will be controlling your costs for. So with that, I'll go ahead and say thanks, and we'll open it up to any Q&A, or if Anthony, if you have anything, questions to add, or go from there.
No, really good job presenting this information for everybody out there. Screenshot, I'll share this as well, but screenshot or take down Matt's contact information, or reach out to me. So if anybody is doing cultivation facilities, or even just manufacturing or anything like that, doesn't even have to be cannabis related. I think it's a great way for you guys to save money and help the bottom line. We did have one question, but I think you answered it about the automation of demand management incentives.
Correct. Yep. And just to kind of hopefully re-answer it real quick, but yes, there are a lot of utility programs out there where they'll actually pay customers for that automated demand management. And you want to make sure you understand those and that you're in the right program for it, because there's certain factors that they require for the amount of load to be shed to make sure you get your payment for that process. A lot of it will pay you to be ready for it. And then as the event occurs, you also get paid for that event. So yes, there's a lot of those programs out there. And each market is a little unique with it, but it's a great question.
Do you have any insight into what states are coming on board for deregulation?
Good question. So there's a few out there that have had it on the radar. And right now, unfortunately, with I think everything that happened over the past 18 months, a lot of things have been put on hold. But a few that were on the radar. So you had Arizona on the radar for a little while. I don't quite know where that stands. I know there was some legislation around there. I think Michigan, there was some expansion talk up there. And then Virginia, well, right now there's talk, well, there's a size requirement. They've talked about maybe ratcheting that back. So each of these, those are probably the ones that are kind of highest up on the list, but nothing that seems to be kind of immediate right now.
Okay. And the last question I had, so, in big facilities, and I'm not sure cannabis facilities are doing it. I know industrial plants do, where they add capacitor banks, right? So you're trying to absorb the reactive power, which when put back on the grid can be damaging to the utilities, their generators and turbines or whatever the case may be. So that's why they charge you a premium when you have a lot of motor loads like HVAC. Do you know how that ties into savings with you if a client installs capacitor banks? So
I'm definitely not an expert on capacitor banks, but I can talk about, maybe in terms of where it could be impacting overall usages and load and things like that. It could also impact the type of rate that or like the rate code that the utility assigns them. So each of these, depending on size and especially in the deregulated markets, you're assigned a particular rate code. And so what that means is it's kind of a snapshot of a typical customer within that size or range or demand profile. They'll bucket them in there, and that's actually where some of the defaulted utility rates come from. Is that's how you get charged on it. But understanding if perhaps by installing those, it might change that customer's rate code, right? It might put them into a different category, which could absolutely benefit them to ensure that they're connecting with the utility to make sure that they're getting the benefit if there is one there. But yeah, I do believe it's something to evaluate when you're looking at those. And if you're not in a competitive market, but at the very least connect with your local utility rep to find out before that starts.
Okay, Very cool. Well, I think that was it for questions. I'm going to share my screen really quick. Just some housekeeping stuff. All right. So definitely appreciate you, everybody attending, but definitely appreciate your time, Matt. I know you're very busy. In terms of our future events, we are going to, I haven't picked the date yet. It should be mid to end of July. We're going to have Hal Extraction discuss extraction pods, which I believe is kind of the way to go, right? It's UL certified, so it kind of helps with the hassle of getting, the fire marshal. It helps with it makes it easier for the approval of it in your building or whether you want to put it outside. So they have a really good product, especially with it being UL certified and just kind of plug and play. We've done some extraction labs where they've had products like this, and we just do the design for make sure they have enough power and make sure the exhaust leaves the actual building that it's sitting in. So everybody be on the lookout for that. And like I said, thank everybody for your time and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Anthony.
All right.